Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, a TA here at Gooner U, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and football studies. Enter our classroom as we discuss the week's news involving Arsenal, Premier League, Champions League, and international football, all from the perspective of a couple Americans. This week was, in fact, an international break, so Arsenal had no matches as a club, despite its constituent members playing for some of their national teams. But don't worry, dear viewer, we have plenty to still talk about, so...
Indeed we do, but that's why we're recording. Otherwise, I guess 30 minutes of it just kind of sitting here and just like chit-chatting would be a little boring for everyone else.
Yeah, so...
But I have to say, I am 0 for 1 in soccer terms today. My dear alma mater, Colgate, played in their league championship game earlier this afternoon and lost 3-0. So that was disappointing. But
what league do they play in? Where are they in the pyramid?
It is NCAA Division I, so top level college soccer. They play in the Patriot League, which is the same league they play in for every other sport. So a lot of private schools in the Northeast: Lehigh, Lafayette, Holy Cross, Bucknell, who beat them. The service academies, Army and Navy. So it's an interesting mix of schools. I would say private schools, with the exception of the service academies, which are technically public, though obviously very different kinds of public schools.
Federal schools, yeah. Yeah, so that's actually more of an interesting answer than I even expected. So wait a second. So there is NCAA soccer? I thought that college teams played... so the reason I thought this was because Marist, which is a college near where I live, I know that they're in the same league as the Kingston Stockade, which, I don't know, they're like 5 or 6 levels down or something. They play across the river, but I know they play Marist regularly. They are in the same league. So I thought that all college teams would then just play in regular divisions, but I guess not.
No, Marist is in it's called the MAC. It's the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference, which is a bunch of like private, mostly Catholic and formerly Catholic schools in the Northeast, Siena, Canisius, schools like that. Yeah, no, they're in the MAC. They might scrimmage now and again against Kingston Stockade, but they would not.
Well, I don't think those are scrimmages. I wonder if that's what they just. I wonder if they play in that league in the spring and summer or something as like training or something like that, because it is part of like their regular schedule. Like, I don't think they're scrimmages.
I'm not familiar with the Kingston Stockade's schedule.
Of course.
But Marist, no, they play. American college soccer is a fall sport, so they're in the league, the league tournament now. They're going to play through. They'll play through they'll pick the NCAA tournament. I think they said Monday is the selection day, and then they'll play a not like any other national championship, a knockout tournament until what they call the College Cup, which is the Final Four, which will be it's like early December, I think is when it is.
Yeah, that makes sense. The games I'm talking about are like, spring to kind of early to midsummer. More to follow. I will follow up on this and report back next week when I have a little more info on that. So
I just quickly looked up their schedule from 2024 because they play a spring, early summer schedule. They did play at Marist this past season since the stadium in Kingston was being renovated, and they did play Marist in a friendly, so a preseason game.
Okay.
They also played one against, they said, Bard New Paltz, which I guess there's some combined club team between Bard and New Paltz, which is interesting. But anyway.
Interesting.
But yes, American college soccer, it's Division I. It's the same, like, schools like University of Indiana, University of North Carolina, Syracuse, Clemson, Stanford.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like what I would expect, basically.
Yeah.
For some reason, I just thought it worked differently. Yeah.
No. It's interesting to watch because the clock counts down, so they don't do stoppage time. It does stop during the game, and then they do additional subs. I forget quite. I think at least in the first half, if you sub a player off, he can't come back on, but he can come back on in the second half. There's a lot of weird sub rules, and I don't believe there's any it's not like the 3 subs, so they do a lot more player shuffling. So,
That is interesting.
And it is fascinating how long, even as they've adopted so many of the other affectations, the uniforms, they're all Nike, Adidas, that outfit them, and they look increasingly the same templates you see on the major professional teams, the national teams. They, increasingly affecting the talk of it. But interesting, they haven't really adapted the rules a lot. Interesting. I don't know what to make of that, but.
No. Well, meanwhile, speaking of the professional clubs, there was some major news that I guess we had enough to talk about last week. We didn't. It slipped our minds to even discuss it. But Edu, what's his last name? Gaspar?
Edu Gaspar or Gaspar?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but I think when we went to record last week, it was a leak or a strong rumor, but it has since been made official that he is leaving Arsenal. He was their I don't know what his official title was, but the recruiter, like he brought in talent.
Well, he was the sporting director.
Okay.
So effectively, in an American terms, he would be the general manager. And so his job was basically to oversee the recruitment and the development of players across all the teams within the club. So not just the first team, so what we talk about, the men's senior team, but also the academy and the players that are brought in and brought up through the academy, as well as also the women's team as well. It has left a bit of a hole, of course, because he was the central figure for the men's team, whereas the academy has Per Mertesacker, and I think it's Claire Wheatley is in charge of the women. So he was kind of overseeing all of them with a special emphasis, apparently, on the men's senior team.
Yeah.
And he has left the club. He has, as I understand it, he is effectively on leave, what's sometimes called gardening leave.
Right.
Mostly just he's not at work anymore. He no longer he technically doesn't work somewhere else yet, but we know he will be working for, I got to pull up his name, Evangelos Marinakis, a Greek billionaire who most famously for his ownership of Olympiacos, the one of the top Greek sides, but also a portfolio of clubs including Nottingham Forest in the Premier League, and then also Rio Ave in Portugal. I assume it's pronounced Rio Ave. Anyway, and allegedly, it seems likely that he will try to expand those holdings and build one of the multi-club networks that we see a lot of other teams and ownership groups working towards.
Right. I mean, as far as we know, it was just him getting a better gig. This is him improving his career, building his career, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, he's an ambitious guy, and the sense is he is probably going to be... So if you look at it in just a very strict Premier League lens, he's moving from Arsenal to Nottingham Forest, which, no offense meant to Nottingham Forest, is a step down in terms of the hierarchy, so to speak, but... He is not in charge of Forest. He is also in charge of Olympiacos, and Rio Ave presumably is involved in selecting and acquiring whatever other clubs are going to get brought into their stable of teams, and then is essentially going to be theoretically overseeing all of them. So it is a step up in a certain amount of complexity in that regard and how they relate to one another. Also, apparently, the sense was, at least this was one of the pieces we were reading about, a couple of pieces from The Athletic. One of them was suggested that he may not even actually move. He might just stay living in London and conduct so much of his business virtually, and then go to each club as needs dictate, but like to visit rather than to
right
than to actually like stay there as he does with Arsenal.
Something else that I hadn't really paid too much attention to him. I mean, he was a character in the All or Nothing documentary that you introduced me to kind of help get me into the sphere of Arsenal fandom. So I knew about him a little bit, but I didn't really pay too much mind to him. But apparently, in reading some of these articles about his departure, he was a player for Arsenal, I guess, a while back, right?
Yes, he was one of the Invincibles.
Oh, okay.
He was on that 03-04 team. So yes, he played for a while with Arsenal, which was partly why bringing him in was a big deal. He also was fairly successful in Brazil with the club team. I forget one of the big clubs in Brazil. I forget which one. and I can't, as skimming through the article, I don't see the name popping up, but then also with the Brazilian national team.
Okay.
So when we talk about ambitions, he certainly has some relatively, has ambitions for himself and for, the steps he'll take and things to be involved in. And, one of the things that you'd see, obviously, with Arsenal is a very collaborative model. They had never had a sporting director before. That's a very continental thing. And the manager sort of used to do all of that. And Arsene Wenger was like the figure who did all of that, not just the coaching, but also the acquisitions and the contracts and all that stuff. And now, there was a lot of restructuring in the aftermath of his retirement, or retirement. It was definitely, there's definitely some force involved in that, but there's been some shuffling around, and so I presumably it's going to stay there. The timing's a little interesting. There's no good time to lose your sporting director. I'm going to mispronounce the poor guy's name. Jason, I think it's Aito, Ayto, essentially was Edu's number 2. And now has presumably will be sort of the interim placeholder. Theoretically, I guess that makes him a candidate for the big job.
Right.
But I don't know. There's been some chatter. There was a piece in The Athletic just earlier this week, actually on Thursday, about what might they be looking for? So since it's an international break and Arsenal's ownership group, the Kroenkes, Stan Kroenke, is based in the U.S. I think he's in L.A. He's either in L.A. or Denver. I'm never sure which. But he's in the U.S., so they're going to go there, have some meetings, and probably start talking about. Probably start to narrow in on what they want and who they want. And there are some names floating out there. The big one that a lot of people are starting to say is Roberto Olabe, who's the director of football at Real Sociedad. We've done a lot of deals with them recently. He's highly regarded for his work not only with Sociedad but also with several other clubs and national teams. Also, Sociedad is the home club of Mikel Arteta.
Right.
But he announced that he would be leaving at the end of the season. And if you're Arsenal, you feel pretty good about where you are for the January window. Because you kind of made your decision. They probably made most of their decisions about who they want to target or what they're looking for, or they probably made some of the informal contacts. They're far enough along; they don't need Edu for that. But the summer gets a little. The summer is where you're going to want someone. You're probably going to want at least have an idea of who that person is going to be, if not necessarily have them in the seat.
And the same as you're saying that things are mostly set for the January transfer window by now, the wheels need to be in motion before the season is over to be working on those summer acquisitions, I imagine. So
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's twofold. There's the internal discussions. What kinds of players are we looking for? What are we going to do with the players we have? What do we know about the interest they're getting? What kind of money do we see incoming versus outgoing? And then, of course, also the outside bit, the recruitment. Who do we want to target? Who do we want to talk to? Do we think they might be interested in coming here? I said the informal conversations. You talk to an agent and go, "Hey, how is this player enjoying his time in that club?" And I said, "We're not asking. We're just, just kind of curious." A lot of, and kind of informal conversations that always go on for that kind of thing. No player contacts. Nobody's contacting play. Well, let me phrase that. No one will ever admit they're contacting players at this stage, and they probably
right.
But rumors are floating around, and so clubs are making their decisions about those kinds of things. So, yeah, for January, a lot of it is going to move into the details. Okay, like actually negotiating with clubs, making sure the players are interested, talking about their new deals that they'll be giving, talking about. What am I looking for? Things like, talking about the financials. Is the club actually interested in selling? What does that money look like? And a lot of that can be done in terms of recruitment, in terms of contracts. They have people whose job it is to do that. I guess Ito. I'm sorry, I don't know his name. I don't know. I've never heard it before. I don't know how to pronounce it. But he'll probably do a lot of that stuff. But also Mikel Arteta will probably take a much stronger role this time. He's much more collaborative, as opposed to previously it's been much more collaborative, or theoretically it's been more collaborative. You never really know. They're so opaque about these things.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Meanwhile, we had some bad roster news. Not horrible, but not something we want to hear this week, right?
Yeah, coming into the break, apparently Ben White underwent a minor knee operation. That's the story on ESPN. We don't know how long this is going to be. We know he's been dealing with the knee thing for a while. Even last season was dealing with it. He missed a couple of games earlier this season already.
Right.
My guess is this is one of those things they were kind of hoping to put off, and they kind of reached the point where they said, we can't really put it off. So you might as well do it now so you get the most out of him for the rest of the season. So
right.
The story on ESPN we're reading said, one source has suggested there are fears White could be sidelined for several weeks, but there's no confirmation. So we really don't know. And we're probably not going to know.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear the phrase minor knee surgery, part of me kind of squints a little bit. Like, is there such thing as a minor knee surgery?
Well, right. I mean, there is no on some level there is no such thing as minor surgery, right?
Right.
Anytime they're going inside your body, it's a little weird. But I think the sense is this isn't. It's not a major injury,
right?
That like would knock him out for the season, kind of thing. It's the kind of thing. It's sort of like the surgery that Jesus had at some point last season. It's more more the lines of like cleaning something or being maybe even being proactive about something, as opposed to trying to play through it and then be seriously injuring it and having to do something reconstructive.
Yep.
That's my guess. I don't really know. I'm not that kind of doctor, so I don't really know.
But as you're fond of pointing out, PhDs had the title first, right?
Yeah. So obviously in terms of White, he'll be out for a couple of weeks. That hurts. Obviously you hope this sort of cleans up whatever issues he's been dealing with. From the other perspective, Arsenal, obviously we've talked about sort of our injury crisis and the things we have at right back, or in case don't have as on our outside backs. I mean, obviously we have Timber at the right back. I know that's where we prefer him to play. He's played left back because we've had troubles with left backs. We've dropped Partey back to left and to the right back position. We do have Zinchenko, who, I know people are kind of down on him, but I don't know. I'd be curious. And we have so many players as well, right? Saka, Rice, Odegaard didn't go with their countries for the international break. We know Saka's nursing some things. Rice has a broken toe.
Right.
Odegaard's returning from an ankle injury. So we know there's some of that kind of playing into it. It'll be very interesting to see what the roster looks like when they announce the lineup for Saturday for the Forest game.
So yeah, we'll see who they slot into the back four. Using that term, it's funny. I got my son a book that we've been starting to read through. It's called Soccer Smarts for Kids, I think. So we're in the definitions section at the beginning of the book right now. And yeah, back four is something that I was explaining to him and why it's called that and things like that. So the definitions they give in the glossary are pretty brief, so I need to expand it a little bit for them.
Unless you go three in the back, which we don't really do.
Right. Yeah, I think they acknowledge when in the paragraph talking about like the who plays where on the field. I think they mention that you can have somewhere between 3 and 5 in the back, but typically you'd still call them your back four. Is just kind of a convention. If someone's talking about their back four, they mean the defenders.
Yep, pretty much.
All right. So what is going on with international football? We should begin, I suppose, with our own national team's friendlies, right?
Yeah, well, they're not friendlies. We should point out. Actually, none of these were friendlies that we're going to mention. There are some. So remember, friendly is simply a game that's not technically competitive, as in it doesn't count for anything.
Right.
The U.S. was playing in the CONCACAF Nations League.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought it was a friendly. Okay.
This was the quarterfinals of the CONCACAF Nations League. We matched up with Jamaica. Played the first game on Thursday evening at Independence Park down in Kingston. Colloquially known as the Office, for reasons that still are not clear to me. Not a bad showing for the U.S. Ricardo Pepi scored, I think, in about 4 minutes in. Matt Turner saved a penalty, and we beat Jamaica 1-0, which is especially nice because the field, as usual, was terrible. It had gotten a lot of rain before, so it was a bit waterlogged. It's hard to say how good the drainage really is in some of these stadiums. But, the ball was, you can watch the game. It's very choppy, very slow. The pitch gets torn up pretty quickly. It's not the most aesthetically pleasing game to watch, and it's CONCACAF, so there's a lot of off-the-ball shenanigans and some physical play that is intermittently punished, at least by the referee. But it is never easy to get a road win in CONCACAF, so to pick up one there, they will play the second leg of their quarterfinal series, will be on the 18th, which is, checks the calendar, Monday night. Little Monday Night Football, if you will. They'll play in St. Louis, and all we have to do is not lose, and we'll go through to the finals in March, which will be out at the house that Stan Kroenke built. That'll be SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California, so it's LA.
Right.
But
yeah, that's good news for Matt Turner. This penalty save, that's a big deal. He should be proud of that. That's good.
Yeah. He's been one of those. It's been a struggle for him at the club game. He is still the number one for the U.S., although in a large part that's because there hasn't been a tremendous amount of competition. It's fascinating because you go back 10 years, or really any time before the last 5 or 6 years, keepers were always a strength of the U.S. We had a number of guys who plied their trade for years in the Premier League. Tim Howard was at Everton. Marcus Hahnemann played a number of years. Greg Guzan played a few years in England. Who else am I thinking of? Brad Friedel, that was the name. So a lot of guys made their way, did a lot of things in Europe, especially in England for a while, even though in other positions it was extremely difficult or unlikely you would see Americans playing there. So It is kind of weird that now Americans, we don't really have any great keepers. It's kind of Turner by default. Mm-hmm. There are a few other guys kicking around, but a lot of them are either kind of young and so need some time to grow into it, or a bit seen as a bit off the radar. I will take a quick moment to pitch for New York City's keeper Matt Freese, who's been excellent this season, and was not called up at all this break. And it's not entirely because of the playoffs too, but he hasn't really gotten any opportunity at all with the national team, which is too bad. He's been really good, but. I don't know. Yeah, it's weird. But yeah, keepers. It's good to see Turner struggling at the club level come up with a big save here. Same with Ricardo Pepi, who's played well with the club at PSV, but has kind of struggled to turn that into a good performance with the U.S. And so to score a goal was a nice thing to see.
You mentioned earlier Tim Howard. Am I thinking of a different name, or is he on NBC's commentary team?
Yep. That's former U.S. national team keeper and the Secretary of Defense. He holds, I believe it is the World Cup record for saves in a game. We lost to Belgium in the round of 16 in 2014. He had like 15 saves.
Interesting.
He was incredible that day. The rest of the team was not very good.
I didn't know he was a keeper. That's interesting.
Yes, he played for a number of years at Everton. Actually, I think he was like the young player of the year at Manchester United for a season. He's a very well regarded keeper in England. And obviously back in the US as well.
Interesting.
Retired.
I wonder if this is related to what you're diagnosing as a problem with the US, but we got emailed from our regional league, so not just like our local town, but the whole like kind of Eastern New York, and I think all of the Hudson Valley. There's a couple leagues in that area, in our area, that as he moves into travel ball and like more competitive play, those are the teams we'll be playing against. But they have an academy that we opted not to have him try out for last year, and he probably won't this year, but they're doing some clinics over the winter. Not only are they doing clinics focused on general like outfield play, they are specifically having keeper 101 sessions. So this will be like a few stretches of 4 sessions at a time. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe this is something U.S. Soccer is aware of, and they may be trying to identify as many keepers as possible at a younger age to try and develop that talent. I hope so. It sounds like it's needed.
I don't think it's a new thing. I think that's kind of something they've probably been doing for a while, at least in terms of like developing talent and having players. I mean, it's a good thing, obviously, but Well,
it's at the very least, I didn't get that same email last year, but I did get emailed about the academy tryouts. So it seems like something new that they're trying.
Could be. But, I mean, it could also be just as simple as your son wasn't of an age where they'd be worried about it yet. So no,
he was in the same division. Like he was eligible for the academy, and like in a year, like kids who are 1 year older than him are eligible for his training this year. So no, it seems in my area at least it is something new. But
I mean, it could be. I don't mean to simply poo-poo the thing altogether. Although also my limited experience on the outside of U.S. soccer is there are occasionally things that should happen and don't happen a lot of times. There's kind of it's a sprawling, massive organization with a lot of subsidiaries, which, it's hard to simply say it's all one thing or all the other, or this is all how it works always. So it could be. I don't know. I suspect that the idea of targeting young players and looking to identify and groom them is that's not new. That's been going on for a while. So,
right. Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, at this point, the U.S. is going to. I mean, Turner's fine, and at this point, the U.S. is targeting a player for 2026, and I'm pretty sure your son or none of the players being drilled with him are going to be the guy in 2026. Although it would be pretty awesome if it was.
Yeah.
Maybe what?
Like rookie of the year for that movie.
9 at that point,
Yeah.
But yeah, a good result for us. Other results: Panama 1-0 over Costa Rica. That was also on the road. Canada 1-0 over Suriname. And then this was the kicker in Honduras. Honduras 2, Mexico 0. Yeah, apparently the Mexican coach was also hit by something thrown from the stands. I think they said it was a water bottle. So, I mean, it wasn't like a brick or something like that, but it was still something hit him being thrown from the stands, which is, again, as we talked about, not cool. Don't throw things on the field. But yeah, with all the top seeds, so Panama, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico all going home, Panama, the U.S., Canada are all in great shape. Mexico's in a bit of trouble. They have to win 2-0 and then win in extra time or penalties, or win by 3 goals, to advance. Now they are going to be at home, not in the Azteca, which I find interesting. I'm always curious how they make those determinations. They'll be in Toluca. It'll still be a heavily Mexican crowd, and chances are what's going to happen is Mexico will score the winning, will win 3-0, but score the winning goal in the 8th minute of 6 minutes of stoppage time, because that seems to be how these things go with Mexico. Or maybe not. I don't know. They have. We kind of talked about this before. Mexico has not been particularly good the last few years, and at a certain point, sort of like watching the U.S. crash out of the Copa this summer. Like, on some level, our talent level says we shouldn't do that, but on some level, it's also like we're not good enough to just show up. Right. And Mexico is increasingly not good enough to just show up, which I think is psychologically more difficult for them to deal with, because for the longest time they basically just had to show up and would win.
Right.
So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I will believe Mexico is eliminated from the tournament when they're actually eliminated. They won't die. You have to kill them. It's kind of a thing. But we'll see. I don't know. Most important thing from my perspective is the U.S. is in good shape, and we'll see how that shakes out. Just get the results in St. Louis, and then it's off to sunny California, to L.A. in March.
All right. So in another confederation, the Asian Confederation, how fared the team of the Rising Sun?
Yes, our friends from Japan, or my friends from Japan, I should say, since I'm the one tracking them. 4-0 over Indonesia. That's
Okay.
yeah. They won. Yeah. They won in Jakarta. Again, Japan currently on top of the group with 13 points, plus 18 on goal difference. They've only conceded 1 goal in all the qualifying, and that was an own goal. So
right.
Japan continues to assert itself. They haven't qualified for the World Cup yet, but they have. They're halfway through that qualifying group, and I feel pretty good about how things are going. If you're Japan, they haven't qualified yet, but they're pretty close. This pace, they're probably going to end up being one of the first teams to actually clinch, other than the hosts who are already there. They will close out this break in Xiamen, I think that's how you say it, in China, where they're going to play China. So that'll be their second game of this window. The Chinese are currently 6 points. They're currently in 4th place, -8 goal difference, and so they are struggling along, although the closest team to Japan is Australia, who also has 6 points. So it's a 7-point gap for the Japanese right now in Group C. And that's the case. The top 2 qualify directly for the World Cup, so they only have to finish ahead of 3rd place. So it's Japan is in pretty solid shape, which isn't a surprise. We talked about this. They are probably the strongest team in Asia, certainly the strongest team in East Asia. And it's not a surprise they're in pretty good shape to head back to come to the US in a couple summers.
Yeah.
A year and a half. Holy cow. World Cup's a year and a half away. Huh.
Yeah. So heading over to CONMEBOL, Argentina played Paraguay and lost 2-1. So that was a little surprising to me to find out. They still sit at the top of the CONMEBOL standings for World Cup qualification with 22 points. They are 3 points clear of number 2, who is Uruguay. And they have 5 goal difference up on Uruguay also. So yeah. I think they're moving on, probably.
They are. If you recall, in South America, it is the top 6 teams qualify for the World Cup. They are currently 10 points up on Venezuela, for who's currently in 7th.
Right.
Argentina should feel pretty good about that. There are only 7 games left in South American qualifying. So actually, I said Japan would be the first to qualify. I don't know. It might be Argentina. They're both for both of them. Obviously, they both have 1 game left in the window. Who is Argentina have left in this window, by the way?
Peru. They're playing Peru in 3 days. We're recording on Saturday the 16th, so that'll be Tuesday, I guess, the 19th, that they will play Peru. So
I did see a story as well. Speaking, just one last note on that Paraguay game, that apparently the Paraguayans made a rule that you couldn't wear any jersey that was either Argentina, big surprise, or basically any of the club shirts of any Argentine players.
Huh.
So I know, for example, you have a Miami Messi shirt.
Right.
That would not have been allowed theoretically.
Have you ever heard of such a thing before?
Oh yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah, because it's about the home field advantage, or at least even if it's just you're looking into the stands, like they don't want people to see the shirts. I mean, let's put it this way: nobody in South America, nobody in Paraguay, I should say, is wearing a Miami shirt except that it says Messi on the back.
Oh, right. I'm
about to say they also had Suarez, who's Uruguayan, so they're probably Uruguay. There's probably some Miami Suarez shirts. That's not unusual, but yeah. If you're wearing a Miami shirt in a game involving Argentina, it's because it says Messi on it. I think we all know this. And so they're just trying to create that home field advantage. And, it's South America, so I'm sure there's some weird subplot to this game that I'm missing having not watched it. But it looks like it worked, I guess. It seemed to work out for Paraguay. So
yeah. Yeah, so they're sitting in 6th right now with 16 points. So still 4 points clear at number 7. So, they've got a little bit of a buffer. But So what about Colombia? How do they do?
The Cafeteros also went down in the early stage. Speaking of Uruguay, they lost at Uruguay in Montevideo. So here's a fun... This was fun. So all I have is just the report listing the goals. Andres Gomez scored in the 96th minute to tie the game at 2. And then in the 103rd minute, the 13th minute of stoppage time, it was Manuel Ugarte scored for Uruguay to give them a 3-2 win.
13th minute of stoppage time. My goodness.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to see what it was what happened.
Yeah.
That would lead. I'm not saying it's untoward. I don't know. Maybe there was an injury of some kind. There's things that could happen. But yeah, that's a lot. That is a lot.
Yeah.
I'm just scrolling through the timeline of the game on FIFA's website. Apparently, they stopped the game for a couple of times. You see, in the 84th minute, they stopped for 2 minutes. In the 70s, they stopped for 2 minutes. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes, that's interesting. Anyway, yes, Colombia took the loss in Montevideo. They are currently technically third. They are tied with Uruguay on points, but behind on goal difference. But again, they are 7 points clear of Venezuela who's in seventh. So again, if you're Colombia, you feel pretty good. Colombia's gonna make it, I think. So is Argentina. I feel like both are in good.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty safe bet. So if we were to sail away to Oceania, how is Fiji doing?
Come sail away. They went 3-3 with Papua New Guinea. And this game also featured a pair of goals in stoppage time. Papua New Guinea scored in the 94th minute, and then Fiji in the 95th to pick up the draw. So currently, they're playing in what they call Group A of their qualifying tournament. The top two in the group advance to the third round. Fiji is in second with 4 points. They trail New Caledonia, who has 6, and they will play New Caledonia tomorrow. Although, given we were talking about a game taking place on the other side of the international date line, they're probably going to play New Caledonia in a couple of hours, actually.
Right.
It's probably when that game will start. Game being held in Papua New Guinea, but they will play New Caledonia. A win would top the group and definitely qualify them through. A draw should do the same as well. Yeah, a draw would also do the same. So all they need is a result against New Caledonia to advance to the third round, which will take place in March, the final round of Oceania qualifying, where they'll face the teams out of the other group, which include Tahiti.
Yeah. So Tahiti won 3-0 against Samoa. So that places them, from what I'm seeing, they've only been 2 matches played, but they are number 2 right now with 3 points and tied on points with Vanuatu, but they have a neutral goal difference while Vanuatu has a -4 goal difference. So that's a pretty significant goal difference.
and more importantly, as I look through this, it's not going to matter because Tahiti and Vanuatu play each other.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So in that sense, Vanuatu has to win.
Right.
And if they win, it doesn't matter by how much. If it's a draw, Tahiti will go through, obviously, on the goal difference.
No, that makes sense. Wasn't thinking about that. Yeah, it's a small group, so yeah.
Yeah. Although I suppose, if Samoa beats New Zealand, I can't. I'm sorry, I can't finish that sentence with a straight face.
Yeah.
Yeah, New Zealand's already through. I can see that they're already through. So, So, by the way, speaking of Fiji and New Caledonia, the runner-up in Group A is going to get New Zealand. So that's what's really on the line as far as they're concerned in that, or almost certainly going to get New Zealand. So, from Fiji's perspective, that's a game they really would like to win. They should really like to win against New Caledonia, top the group, and then likely get Vanuatu or Tahiti for the semifinal as opposed to New Zealand.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're done with the international game, there was an article I'd read some weeks ago now. This was toward the beginning. It was over a month ago. It was like toward the beginning of October, and this was, I think, just before Saka's injury that took him out of a bunch of matches. So we didn't want to talk about it then because it kind of felt weird talking about his style of play when he wasn't going to be playing, but he's been back, and it's an international break week, so we're looking for things to talk about. So this article, this was published in the Times, so the Times of the UK, and this writer was. I'll read the headline. The headline is Bukayo Saka should be freed from Arsenal's defensive shackles. And as you read the article, you see his perspective, his or hers. I'm not actually sure the gender of the person who wrote this.
Hamza Khalik Lunat. I'm fairly certain that's a man.
Okay, yeah, it could be. Not sure. Oh yeah, I pulled up his profile, and yes, he is. So his view was that because of Saka playing for Arsenal, and with Mikel Arteta's preferred style of play, which I'll get into in a minute, that Saka isn't allowed to score as many goals as he would in another club. And Arteta's style of play is basically that everybody is a defender, everybody tracks back, everybody helps prevent goals from being scored, and then your next priority is getting up the field to try and score after. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. That's basically what I think. That's how I read what he's trying to say.
Yeah, it sounds like that analysis is true. I mean, I don't know, but I guess from my perspective, I am so focused on almost exclusively watching Arsenal. I don't necessarily have the perspective on what other clubs do in contrast to that. I mean, I guess I see with Miami a little bit that, yeah, Messi doesn't come all the way back most of the time. He kind of hangs out around midfield without tracking all the way back into his own team's third. But is that unusual for Arsenal? Like, is that a problem for Saka?
Well, it depends how you're looking at it. It could theoretically be a problem for Saka in terms of like personal statistics, right? I mean, the idea is that because he's playing it in hockey, they would say a 200-foot game. He's not just playing on the offensive end; he's playing in the defensive end as well. He's back checking. Or in soccer terms, he's tracking back. He's playing defensively. He's making defensive plays, and we've seen him on occasion, right, take the ball off of attacking players deep in his own half before starting to push forward. Some of this is just there's a little bit of wish casting in here about why doesn't Arsenal play the way I want them to play. I mean, and it's an interesting question, right? How, what is like, to me, this isn't a surprise that Arteta is asking him to track back because he asks everybody to do that, right?
Right.
And he kind of points that out, right? That this is how Arsenal plays, and he contrasts it with like Phil Foden at Manchester City or particularly Cole Palmer at Chelsea. But I mean, those are two very different clubs that are set up in different ways. As I read this, and I read this a little bit later than you did, there've been some conversation over the last few weeks over, like, who is Arteta as a manager? Because so many people have wanted him to be Pep light, because he was an assistant at City under Pep before coming to Arsenal. But Arteta's a smart guy who's been influenced by a lot of different people in terms of how the game should be played. And so the comparison was coming out, well, he's not actually Pep, he's Jose Mourinho. He prefers a tight, rugged defensive style and win 1-0 and blood you out and, dark arts and all of this stuff. And some of it's just kind of silly. I mean, it's also worth pointing out that, one of his longest tenures is the two clubs in England he spent the most time with, of course, were Arsenal under Arsene Wenger, who was very much wasn't a very tactical coach. It wasn't exactly roll the ball out there and let the players figure it out, but it was meant to be very open, very expressive, and at its best, I mean, was literally unstoppable, literally unbeatable at its best. But obviously led them to a bit of trouble later on toward the end of his time when they probably could have used a little bit more structure. The other manager he spent a lot of time with at Everton was David Moyes. And Moyes has generally always been a more defensive manager, especially at Everton and then later at West Ham, from which he recently left. some of that is a reaction to talent level. West Ham and Everton typically are going into these games at a bit of a talent disadvantage compared to certainly the big clubs, your Arsenal, Liverpool, City, United, Chelsea, Spurs, clubs like that, where it's important that you play a little more defensively because they're bringing a little bit more to the table. So Arteta brings a lot of that in, and one of the things he is generally preached, and we can see this going way back to certainly through the COVID period or the restart period, where we got to see him do a lot of extra coaching because there were no fans in the stands. Mm-hmm. Is a sense of structure, that he wants structure. He doesn't really deal well with players like Nicolas Pepe, who didn't fit into the structure. And so in a lot of senses, like, to sit here and say, oh, Saka should just be allowed to play without the structure. No, like you don't. In Arteta's mind, like, you're asking for Arteta to be something that he's not. Now, it's a fair thing to say. Maybe it should be. Maybe they should be willing to let Saka roam more freely. Maybe he should have that ability to go do that kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, I'm a guy who likes the idea of playing in hockey terms, again, the 200-foot game. I like the idea of being able to play and compete across the field. And Saka is still able to, as you've seen, generate. Again, the things that have slowed him down in terms of putting points on the board hasn't been his defensive responsibilities. Mm-hmm. It's been injuries. Mm-hmm. So, in that sense...
injuries and certain defensive structures on other teams where they're just basically dedicating, like, two guys to covering him, like double teaming him and not making it as easy for him to break free, right?
Yeah, but I mean, we saw them doing that in the early part of the season, and it didn't matter because he was still creating something mm-hmm. with it. I guess the idea that concerns me is Arsenal has enough attacking talent. Like, I feel like if there's a player that's actually allowed to roam freely, it's Kai Havertz.
Right. And
we sort of talked about how he's able to drift into space and sort of put himself into positions like that. But Havertz also tracks back defensively. Havertz is sort of putting himself into positions where if somebody needs to, they can find him with the ball. Whereas like Chelsea and Palmer, the point is for Chelsea to get the ball to Palmer. He goes into space, so he will get the ball, which I don't think is quite the same case with Havertz. Mm-hmm.
And it's a good point that having Havertz track back is not stopping him from scoring. He's doing fine with goals. So
certainly with points. And I think part of this conversation comes up as well because we sort of talk about this at times, and even through last season, right? Because Arsenal doesn't have a number 9, there is a sense that sometimes if the goals aren't coming, they don't have a player who can really create a goal. Or maybe, and I think part of what the article is trying to say is maybe they do actually have that player, and it's Bukayo Saka, but it would involve him not playing out on the right wing and being restricted to this channel, or cutting in across the box, but instead rather being allowed to roam a little more freely. But when you think about the structure that he's able to build with Ben White and Martin Odegaard and how effective that's been, I guess I'd sort of say I understand where he's coming from. I just don't see it. I certainly don't see it happening, and I don't think the author thinks that's what's going to happen either.
No, I mean, I guess what I think he was intimating is that this may cause Saka to want to leave Arsenal, where he can roam more freely in another club, like be the Cole Palmer of another club.
I think what Saka wants more than anything else is probably to win things. What I mean when I say that is because this is the sort of thing that was floating around once he really kind of started to break into the team. What happens when Manchester City comes in and drops a bunch of money to try and get him? And the answer is, well, it depends. Can he win the league with Arsenal? Can he win a cup? Can he win the Champions League? Because if you can do that stuff at Arsenal, well, then he's not going to want to go to City. He's going to be happy. He's a London kid. He'll be happy to stay. But if Arsenal continues to not win things, It's easy for us as fans to sort of sit here and say, okay, we're building, we're having a great season, and, we keep doing this, and eventually we'll break through. But we saw this with Harry Kane. You go all that time without winning a trophy. Like, your career is only so long. You want that opportunity to win something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not enough for you to sort of look at the club and say, well, they'll eventually get there. Or you could go to Bayern Munich or Manchester City and be really likely to win the league. So, that's the concern.
Right.
It's not so much that he's going to look and go, well, I want to be able to score 50 goals. Why can't I be like Cristiano Ronaldo or Mo Salah? I don't think that's what is concerning to him. I think it would be a question of, do we really feel like Arsenal will be able to actually win the trophies that he wants to win?
Right.
And I don't. Yeah, that's where it starts to get, as much as you sort of want to say, look, we can point to the exogenous circumstances and, City and the 115 charges and their titles don't really count and all that. Liverpool's won a Champions League and a Leagues Cup and the league, and it is a fair criticism to say, trophies aren't the be all end all, but it is a fair criticism to say we haven't finished off anything since the FA Cup in 2020. Which, by the way, I think that starting 11, I don't think any of those players are still on the Arsenal roster. Saka might. I think Saka might even have been on the bench for that game.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's that. At some point, you got to finish stuff off with a trophy, and if there's a concern about him leaving, that's what I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Random aside, I think, and I've talked about this with some people, I feel like the missed opportunity of the last few weeks was really a chance to maybe put Saka in the central part of the field, not to play the Odegaard role, because I think only Odegaard can play that role. But I almost wonder, put Jesus out on the right and have Martinelli or Trossard out there on the left and put Saka in the middle and kind of let him, because we know he can pass.
Yeah.
There's no law that says he has to be a right-sided player. I don't know. I think they said he had played centrally a little bit when he was younger. I mean, at some point you don't want to pull him off the right wing because he's just so good at it. Like, you don't want to lose that kind of player. But maybe, I don't know. But now, but hopefully
during that period, especially when we were down players and a lot of players were playing in positions where they don't typically, you were seeing people playing out of position. Yeah, that would have been interesting.
But of course, that sort of, you get into that, right? The more players that are playing out of position, the less likely you are to see a Saka play out of position
right.
as well. So I get it, but at the same time, it's like, I wonder. I don't actually know. Maybe I'm completely off. Maybe they tried it in practice and Arteta was like, no, that was oh my God, that didn't work at all. But I didn't see that, so I don't know.
Right. All right. So there's another, calling it news. I guess it's news. It's not Arsenal club news. It's kind of Premier League news, something that was coming up on the various sites to cover the Premier League. Do you want to talk about this story? We generally don't talk about the officials as it pertains to any particular match. We try to avoid that, but when the official is garnering headlines of his own, maybe that's something we can talk about a little bit.
Right. So at this point, I think if you're listening to this and you follow the Premier League, you've no doubt heard of David Coote, a referee who has been suspended by the PGMOL after a video emerged. This is a quote from the story in The Athletic. After a video emerged online of him making offensive remarks about Jurgen Klopp, the former Liverpool manager.
Yeah.
We don't know, as far as I'm aware, we don't actually know. Apparently, they're not even 100% sure it was Coote, although they can't say for 100% fact it was him, but it probably was. And we don't really know when it happened or what the context is of any of this, but he said a lot of things about Klopp, and is he as I understand, because I haven't seen the video, but I think the sense was he had been out drinking with some people, and it got sort of let the alcohol do the talking. which, is not a great look in general. But yeah, hey, I mean, especially in this day and age with people's camera phones and whatnot, there's far too many of those things floating around. But it is a concern because, as you and I were talking about this before, right? The one thing that any sporting league or organization, forget, the Premier League, any kind of organization, the one thing they cannot afford is a question about the integrity of the competition. Mm-hmm. And if there's a sense that the referees are biased against certain managers, and by extension, certain clubs, and we should add, as I understand it, one of the insults he had for Klopp was he called him German. Now, obviously, in print, that doesn't sound so bad because, well, yes, Jurgen Klopp is German. Everyone knows this. But apparently said in kind of a bit of a sneering fashion. And it comes sort of two different things. One, there is a history within the league, and clubs like Arsenal have feelings about this, that people not from the British Isles, players, managers, are treated a bit differently. That they're soft, or they're whiny, or that they dive as players. All the sort of negative stereotypes about the continent, and those are the things we don't want in the proper English game. Now, of course, as an American, I can say this about all of them. They do all the same things, of course, but but the idea, and Arsenal saw this especially with Arsene Wenger being French in his early days. And especially as they started to bring in, Arsenal was one of the clubs at the forefront of a lot of foreign players, especially French players. And there were comments made about Wenger, which, today would not be considered okay. They weren't really okay when they were said, even then, but sort of. So for him, even just to say like German, what do you mean by that? Add into one of the key criticisms of the PGMOL and the Premier League officials is that they pretty much all come from the greater Manchester area. Now, maybe these are the best referees in England. Says a lot, but the idea that you're drawing from, well, population-wise, what is essentially a very small group of people, relatively speaking, how much to their intrinsic biases of being there. And again, I as much as we complained about them, and we all have our least favorites, and we think some of them are terrible, and all of that, I do believe they are trying their best. I honestly do believe the referees are trying to do the best they can do, even as I'm not satisfied with how good their best is. But I right. But there are
come
these
by
ideas,
it honestly.
Yeah. But there are these ideas. There is this concern that because they are also geographically limited, that creates a certain blinkering on the referees and the way they call games, and the fear is that certain players and teams are therefore being treated unfairly. Mm. And so in that sense, as soon as you see the videos come out, he had to be suspended from the perspective of the league and the PGMOL, because all of this absolutely calls into question his objectivity. I don't know. I mean, my suspicion is he was probably refereed his last Premier League game. But I don't know. I don't want to sit here and say he's a bad person and he hates all non-British people. We're not going to do that. But no. It is a concern because it opens up the door in an age where we kind of already talked about it. Trust in the referees is not very high. Mm-hmm. And some of that is kind of a general sense we see in the world, people not trusting various kinds of authority figures. And some of it, frankly, is having watched some of them perform. And we've talked about some of for our sense, the inconsistencies that we see and things like that. So,
Yeah, I mean, all that said, it's like, I guess the thing that I've paid the most attention to in my life, it's like analogous to this because I haven't paid attention to sports for most of my life. But you think about like judges or like a Supreme Court justice in the United States or something like that, right? You're expecting impartiality when they're doing their job. But you'd be kidding yourself if you think that they don't actually have opinions on, especially when you're talking about like high profile cases or something, they don't have opinions on the people involved. It's like, to me, the bar isn't necessarily what can you record them saying about any individual. It's more, does that show in the work? And I get what you're saying, where it's like the perception of bias is just as bad, if not worse than the actual bias. But it's still a shame for somebody to be knocked down that much for essentially having an opinion and talking about it privately to somebody who he had no reason to believe this was going to make it online, probably. Although, I guess when you are in this world, maybe you should be more careful about what you say at all times, which is unfortunate, but
yeah, especially if, and again, I haven't seen the video, so I don't know how, my impression was he wasn't being secretly recorded by somebody, like, the phone's out and like here talking to the camera. So
yeah, I guess maybe they should just kind of, if you're in the public light, just be more careful what you say. You never know who's recording it. So what's up for next week?
Right. So we're going to wrap up the international break. Just a recap of the games we mentioned, at least from our perspective that we are caring about. USA home against Jamaica. Japan at China, Argentina versus Peru, Colombia versus Ecuador, Fiji versus New Caledonia, and Tahiti versus Vanuatu. But then the Premier League's back on Saturday. Arsenal home to Nottingham Forest. We're finally back at home. And that'll be on Peacock. Forest has been a surprise in the early part of the season. Good for them, but hopefully this is an opportunity for us to put both of us back where we belong. I don't want to say that about Forest. I don't care where they finish up. But certainly from Arsenal's perspective, we want to be in the title race at home against a club like Forest. This is a game where we really need to be targeting 3 points. So,
yeah, I mean, especially at this point in time, we are tied with them on points and ahead by a margin of 1 in goal difference. So. Yeah. We should put some miles between us. Yeah.
I feel pretty good about us in the long term of the season relative to Forest. However, since they're here, let's deal with this.
Yeah. Let's give them a North London welcome. Thanks for joining us at Gooner U. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with the link in the show notes. Your homework for today is to hit the like button on any of our videos for the week, including our shorts on all social platforms you can find us on. We record the show using Zencastr. If you'd like to try it out, you can support Gooner U by signing up using the link in the description, which also has links to everything we talk about and our social pages. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you can find him in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
Come on back, Arsenal.